Okay. When we asked Pete Buttigieg, who Chris just mentioned is going to be our first guest, he's coming up shortly, but when we asked him to come on our first show just a couple weeks ago, I kind of thought we'd mainly talk about politics, and we definitely will. We will talk a lot about politics. He's got a lot to say about it. But what I didn't realize at the time is he would also kind of be the perfect person to talk to at this moment for a very different reason. I mean, just hours ago, we learned that last night, just after midnight at San Francisco International Airport, 2 United Airlines planes clipped each other's wings. They were still on the tarmac when it happened. Thankfully, nobody, of course, was hurt. But it, of course, isn't an isolated incident. I mean, it comes on the heels of yesterday's news that a radar failure left the air traffic controllers managing Newark Airport operating blind, without radar or radio communication for 90 seconds last week. 90 seconds. And by the way, NBC also reported late today that air traffic control at Newark lost contact with pilots at least 2 other times since August. Not an isolated incident either. But that latest incident that I just mentioned that occurred last week was so bad that it led to multiple FAA employees being placed on trauma leave. Of course, why wouldn't it? It's incredibly traumatic. But given how out of control this all feels and how scared not just the air traffic controllers, but many people out there are to fly right now, I keep thinking about an ad that ran during the 2008 primary campaign, which you also may remember.
It's 3 a.m. and your children are safe and asleep. But there's a phone in the White House and it's ringing. Something's happening in the world. Your vote will decide who answers that call. Whether it's someone who already knows the world's leaders, knows the military, someone tested and ready to lead in a dangerous world. It's 3 a.m. and your children are safe and asleep. Who do you want answering the phone?
Now, obviously, that ad at the time, 15 years ago, was meant to paint a relative political newcomer, Barack Obama, as someone who was totally unprepared to deal with the middle of the night calls when a crisis hits. And to be fair, it is a fundamental question that everybody should consider about any president and the people they surround themselves with. And I keep thinking about that ad because right now, the guy sitting in the Oval Office picked this guy to answer the middle of the night calls about what is happening in our skies.
This is the true story of 5 ex-Real Worlders, picked for the ride of their lives.
Sean from the Real World Boston, who you just saw there, is of course Trump Transportation Secretary Sean Duffy. Now, part of the reason I am bringing up that he was on MTV's Road Rules All-Stars, a good season, if I may say, back in the 1990s, is because it's kind of funny. But the other reason is that this was the most relevant part of Mr. Duffy's resume to lead the transportation department. And I am not kidding here. I'm not being tongue-in-cheek or exaggerating. I mean, a local reporter in the Wisconsin Examiner who has covered Duffy's career since 2009 put it this way. He said, quote, "I only have one account in all those years when he even mentioned a transportation issue." The reporter goes on. I love the emphasis. That's it. One mention of a transportation issue. So, yeah, I mean, Sean from the Real World Boston is the guy in charge of our nation's skies at the moment. He is the one who would answer the 3 a.m. phone call. And while he was not picked by Trump for his work on the real world that we know of, never say never, we don't entirely know for sure, he was picked in large part, because of his work on Fox News. And because of his willingness to go on national TV and basically politicize any issue. A willingness that seems to continue to this day. I mean, case in point, the aforementioned Newark airport crisis.
But how close were we for potential disaster there?
No, listen, we have backups in place, but let's talk about what happened. So we have really old infrastructure in America. It hasn't been updated in the last 30, 40 years. This should have been dealt with in the last administration. They did nothing.
So again, they've been in office for more than 100 days. A conservative host, who's sympathetic, asked the current transportation secretary about a current crisis happening right now at one of the biggest airports in the country, an international airport, by the way, too. And his response was to blame the Biden administration, which hasn't been in office for more than 3 months. And that comes as today the Washington Post reported that Sean Duffy's Federal Aviation Administration also suspended the work of the independent panel of experts in charge of reviewing what is actually going wrong with air traffic control. I mean, we'd love to know the answer to that, right? The Post reports that expert panels' work has been put on hold completely since February, as in a couple of months ago. I'm kind of betting the last transportation secretary, Pete Buttigieg, may have some thoughts on that. I'm going to talk with him about it in a moment. But the most important thing here is this. This is still a crisis. I mean, it needs to be solved by the people who are currently in power. It's not just Newark either. On Friday, 2 commercial planes had to abort their landings at D.C.'s Reagan National Airport because an Army helicopter entered the airport's airspace. That, of course, comes just months after 67 people were killed in a collision at that same airport between a commercial jet and an Army helicopter. Now, as for Friday's near miss, the AP reported that the Army helicopter appeared to take the, quote, scenic route around the Pentagon, the scenic route. And then in subsequent reporting, the AP added that the helicopter in question was part of a battalion that provides transport to top Pentagon officials. Now, that raises lots of questions. And if you're wondering what top Pentagon officials were taking helicopters on the scenic route here, you're not alone. I'm also wondering that. But here's the thing. Sean from the real world, the transportation secretary, doesn't seem to know either.
Who do these generals think they are that they have to take helicopters to go to meetings or go to air? I don't know who it was. We should find out. And well, the DOD.
Well, who
has,
do we ask? I mean, you're the transportation secretary. How do you not know?
The FAA doesn't know. We asked the DOD. The DOD has promised radical transparency. They should tell us who is qualified to take a helicopter out of the Pentagon. I don't know, but they have to tell us.
Well, could you just call up Hegseth?
Well, I should actually. Why don't
Let's
you call
him right now?
You call Pete.
Okay,
Dial
I got
in.
it.
I love that he's kind of an observer of the crisis that his actual agency oversees. And why don't you call Pete? That would make a lot of sense. I hear he's very reachable on Signal. If you're trying to reach him right now, good way to get him. Now, to be fair, Pete Hegseth, the other Fox host who turned into a cabinet secretary, seems to be a theme here, has his own growing list of problems right now that might be tying him up a little bit, maybe making it harder for him to take a call. Who knows? The latest being this report from Reuters, that a few months ago, Hegseth apparently shut off military aid to Ukraine all on his own without telling anybody. Now, here's what the story says. Roughly a week after Donald Trump started his second term as president, the U.S. military issued an order. Stop 11 flights loaded with artillery shells and other weaponry bound for Ukraine. In a matter of hours, frantic questions, of course, reached Washington from Ukrainians in Kyiv. Top national security officials in the White House, the Pentagon, and the State Department couldn't provide answers. Now, records reviewed by Reuters indicate that, quote, there was a verbal order from the Secretary of Defense that stopped the flights. That's how it happened. The president, though, was unaware of Hegseth's order, as were other top national security officials. And 3 sources told Reuters that the cancellations happened in this chain of events. Hegseth met in the Oval Office with Trump and, quote, misinterpreted discussions with the president about Ukraine policy and aid shipments. That is quite a misinterpretation, I will say. Sounds like Pete Hegseth met with the president, thought he wanted him to cut off aid to Ukraine immediately, and then he just went and ordered the planes to stop. And what followed, of course, was mass confusion within the U.S. government, within Ukraine, from European partners, from basically anybody involved. According to the Reuters piece, the Ukrainians quickly asked the administration through multiple channels, but had difficulty obtaining any useful information. They were, of course, the ones waiting for the artillery and the military equipment. They're in the middle of a war right now. They couldn't get any information. Now, in a normal White House, there's a system in place, a big bureaucratic system that has been working for Democratic and Republican administrations to keep something like this from happening. Typically, there'd be an entire process run through the National Security Council, where all of the considerations about freezing military support for an ally would be discussed and sometimes aggressively debated. That's a healthy part of the process, too. People from the intel community and the State Department and the Defense Department all have different objectives and things they need to raise. That's an important part of the process before they tee up a decision to the president. Any president makes the final decision. But all of that coordination and, yes, debate means everyone is also prepared to implement, which also requires a tremendous amount of coordination to get it right, because there are many different levers of power being worked from the U.S. government and in touch with officials overseas at all times. No one typically is surprised within the U.S. government, and ideally not allies and partners either. It's clearly, to state the obvious, not what happened here. But it all should serve as a pretty stark reminder as to why the National Security Council is actually pretty necessary. According to the Washington Post, though, some senior White House officials are questioning the need to even have a National Security Council at all. I mean, who needs all that expertise and debating and coordination among agencies when your cabinet can just handle communication and policy making through a dozen Signal group chats or many other Signal group chats? I'm sure we'll find out about more. Seems to be working well so far, doesn't it? I mean, meanwhile, Pete Hegseth has also found the time in all of this last couple of days to issue an order to cut 20% of the military's generals and admirals. 20%. The one-page memo has few details about how these cuts will happen or which positions will be cut or whether dozens of high-ranking, long-serving, expert military officers are about to get summarily fired. But what we know is that he thinks eliminating four-star generals will, according to him, help us, and this is his direct quote, uphold our position as the most lethal fighting force in the world. That is hard to wrap your head around, that argument, but that's what he said. So to sum us all up here, we appear to have a White House that has no functioning or coherent process, which matters for making or implementing decisions, at the same time that it is hollowing out expertise inside the military and other government agencies, investigating things like our airs and sky and making sure planes are safe. I guess, though, we shouldn't be surprised that Transportation Secretary Sean Duffy was back on Fox News today. I guess it went so well yesterday, complaining that he still can't get any answers from the Pentagon about that Army helicopter causing those aborted landings at Reagan Airport last week.
I don't know why the Pentagon hasn't gotten back to you on this yet, but we hope they sure do soon.
So do I.
So do we. I mean, what's happening here? He works in the same administration.